Since this vehicle is so wildly different to most of the stuff which I of course review in Beards and Cars, we're going to approach it in a different way. This is less an Auto Trader kind of review, if you will, and more a Jay Leno's Garage kind of video. And for those of you who have been following the project, of course you will be very familiar with this car, inside and out, because on the members section here on the channel, over the course of the past year, I've been building this car, along with a team of 5 other guys. It spanned 2 workshops and around £30,000, which included buying both of the vehicles which were used to build it, and of course all of the workshop stuff and the custom parts which had to be made. So instead of talking about this car as if it's something that you're going to drive down the road and see for sale at your local car dealership, we're instead going to talk about it in terms of addressing the most common questions which I get asked about the car. And those questions are, and I'll probably put time codes for them in there, why, first of all. That is by far the biggest and most common question which I get. Why would you do this to a Rolls-Royce? Who on earth in their right mind would have this kind of idea in the first place? So of course we'll talk about that first. Secondly, what's it like to drive? Of course that's a question which a lot of people have. Then the third one is of course to cover the overall spec, because I do know the spec for the car as if it were a production vehicle. It's surprising actually, the weight, so stick around for that. Of course the fuel economy, that is another very common question which I get asked. And last but definitely not least, what's next? So when you build something as crazy as this, do I have anything else planned for the car? What do I plan to do with the car? And maybe even other crazy ideas that I have in future to start builds for, etc. So first things first, let's get to that main question of why. I didn't set out to buy a Rolls, chop it up and turn it into a 4x4. That's the kind of thing I would have probably talked about doing, but never actually put my money down on the table to think about doing it for real. However, I picked up a Rolls. My original plan was to keep it essentially as what it already was, a semi-ratty Rolls-Royce. I was going to have it patinaed up and have it basically lowered with a straight pipe, but the standard V8 engine, standard interior, basically like a Rolls-Royce rat rod or a hot rod, if you will. So essentially the British equivalent of my Lincoln, which is very much that same kind of vibe. The problem was I very quickly saw that doing stuff like that, as simple as it sounds, was still going to be really expensive. For example, there's only one company I'm aware of who even make a coilover kit for a Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow to allow it to be lowered at all, because this thing has as standard something like, I think it's 42-inch suspension springs. Utter insanity, and of course there's not much of a market for lowering them, so you're paying something like 5 or 6 grand just to lower the car by a couple of inches. I very quickly saw that, that's maybe not really for me, so I thought, what actually do I like about the car? The panache which the brand has. I like the look and the shape. It is, I would say, the most iconic Rolls-Royce shape probably of all time. And finally, of course, I love that kind of classy, old school interior with the real wood, the old leather, just the kind of vibe that a classic car gives you, I think cannot really be matched. So in other words, I basically like the shell, the grille, and the interior. So I thought, why not try and look on the internet, see if I can find something similar enough to basically pop that on top of another car and make it something easier to live with underneath in terms of economy, probably performance as well, definitely road holding and cornering, and probably reliability, chances are. And as it turns out, I found a couple of potential donors. I decided to take the plunge on a Mitsubishi L200, which as you can see turned out to be pretty damn perfect. In fact, the difference in wheelbase is literally 3 centimeters, so we didn't have to chop or extend either vehicle, which anyone who's done a body swap will know that's kind of crazy, to be able to find 2 different cars so radically different in purpose, separated by around 50 years, that can fit this well. You almost never come across that. Even more impressively, the track width that you can see here in the video, so in other words how the wheels fit inside the arches, that is also completely unmodified, so it's not lost under the arch and it doesn't stick out either. It is literally the most perfect fit you could possibly ask for. I've said before that a couple of people have done kind of this idea, like chopping a Rolls into a pickup truck on a Dodge Ram chassis. That's been done in the States. Over in Australia there's one on top of a Nissan Patrol. That's probably the closest to this thing, but that one sticks out of the arches a lot more. So there have been similar ideas, but as far as I can tell, and I mean the car's been around for over a year, so you'd think I'd have heard of it by now, I don't think anyone's done a Mitsubishi based build. So at least as far as I'm aware, this is the first of its kind. So the concise version of that entire story is, I guess, to say that the car wasn't really my plan, but it very quickly turned into more of a salvaging operation, because the option was to either keep this ratty Rolls-Royce, which was definitely a scam in terms of how bad it actually was versus what I was led to believe. It was either basically do something with it to save the car, or sell it for scrap and lose even more money. I did not want, for my worst experience with owning a car, to be a Rolls-Royce. That would have been hilarious, but I just didn't want that to be the case. I didn't want to be beaten by this scam, this lemon of a car. So instead of that, I thought, let's make something crazy, let's go all in, but make a vehicle which, at least on paper, I could even use every day. And spoiler alert, I actually have been using it every day. And that of course segues nicely into question number 2. What is it actually like to drive? It's a fascinating looking vehicle which, as I've heard from one of my local neighbours who's a huge fan of the car, he said it looks like a house driving towards you because it's so high high up off the ground. It is tall, but it's got loads of room underneath, basically the same amount of room as a Mitsubishi. So in other words, being not an SUV, but a proper off-road truck, this actually can go off-road, and thanks to the fact that it has the high-low ratio box, and you can switch between rear-wheel drive and four-wheel drive, it's a proper actual off-roader. In fact, in some cases, it's almost on eye level with trucks. So kind of a monster truck when you're actually driving this thing around. In terms of how it actually feels, though, to get back to that point, it's way better than you would think. I think it really does benefit from the fact that the suspension setup on a Mitsubishi is far stiffer. Obviously, we've done away with the whole hydro-pneumatic Citroen licensed suspension, which the Rolls-Royce has, and now it's just got leaf springs on the back, stiff coils on the front, just a standard Mitsubishi setup. So the suspension is designed to keep that road holding ability, to go off-road if you need to, and to carry a lot of weight without feeling like it's wallowing around. So the cornering is actually really good. In terms of braking power, well, again, standard setup, so it's got drums on the rear, discs on the front, and in terms of spec, well, it's a standard Mitsubishi engine, so 2.5 litre straight 4 turbo diesel, about 135 horsepower, so nothing remarkable there, but a good 260, 270 foot-pounds of torque, which is up around, what's that, 400 newtons, maybe a bit more, somewhere around there. So off the line, it actually is pretty good. You can pull off the line pretty well. The top speed, I believe, is limited on these to like 100, 105 anyway, and it's not like I'm ever going to need to go that fast. Even on the motorway, I'll probably sit at about maybe 60, 65 miles an hour for peak fuel economy. And that, of course, brings us to that question. What on earth is the fuel economy on this thing? Because it's this enormous car. Everyone knows a Rolls drinks fuel like crazy. This, in comparison, well, I'm currently going through kind of a test phase of working out my real-world fuel economy, but to tie into another piece of information which shocked me, I drove it to a weighbridge, and I asked them, would you let me put it on there, see how much it weighs? I was expecting, given that this literally has two entire chassis put together, the complete steel ladder frame of the Mitsubishi, with, of course, transfer box, four-wheel drive, etc., all of which the Rolls-Royce never had, and then on top of that, which the Mitsubishi never had, you've got the complete, very heavy, galvanized steel monocoque of the Rolls, full shell, full interior, and in the end, and this is the insane part, I thought it was going to weigh 2.7 tons, at least, which is about the same as a Range Rover. It weighs, with me and half a tank of fuel, 2,360 kilos, which is about the same as a Bentley Continental GT. But here's the even crazier part. 85 kilos of that is me, and 80 kilos of that is half the tank of fuel, because the tank is massive. So that means if you take out that 165 kilos from me and the fuel, this actually weighs 2,195 kilos. That's 2.2 tons, which is virtually the exact same weight as a standard Silver Shadow. I don't understand how that is even possible with two chassis, four-wheel drive, and a massive fuel tank. It really does go to show how obscenely heavy that Rolls-Royce engine, transmission, and complete drivetrain must have been, because that is an insane difference to be so close with all of this extra, well, steel. It's not like it's carbon fibre, it's a heavy vehicle to begin with. Obviously, it's not a performance vehicle, and it's not an actual rally support vehicle, so any performance just as a normal daily driver is more than fine enough. In terms of fuel economy, it should be feasibly quite similar to a Mitsubishi. It should be averaging somewhere around 25 to the gallon, and on the motorway, well, that's when it gets really good, because an L200 can do 30, even perhaps 32 at a push if you've got a nice tailwind on the motorway, and again, 30 to the gallon out of this thing, that's way better, probably double what you would think it would be. In terms of the fuel tank, I've referenced it a couple of times, it is absolutely massive. The tank is in the boot on this car, it's a custom unit, I designed it myself. Even the tank itself is a hybrid between the two cars, because one of the biggest goals I had for this project was I wanted to use as much of each car as possible without adding other stuff. So I wanted to kind of really recycle both vehicles in the purest sense, rather than just hollowing them out and upgrading everything. And one of the ways that I did that with the tank is obviously the tank itself is custom, but then in terms of the filler cap, that's straight off of the Rolls, and then the fuel pickup and the sensor is straight off of the Mitsubishi. So it's still like the symbiosis of the cars put together, which I'm really proud of. Then on top of that, the tank itself is almost the size of both of the others put together. So a Mitsubishi has a 75 litre tank, the Rolls has a very large 109 litre tank, except Mitsubishi you get about maybe 500 miles out of a tank at best on the motorway, with the Rolls probably about 350 to 380 at best, obviously with 10 to the gallon. This tank isn't quite the same as both put together, but it's not far off. It's 160 litres, so it's an endurance tank basically. It's 35.5 UK gallons, which means that I should get at least 900 miles out of a tank of diesel, even with mixed driving. And if you just stick to the motorway, well, that quite literally means I could drive from Land's End to John O'Groats, which is the very lowest point of the UK, to the very highest point of the UK, and almost all the way back down again on one tank of fuel. Over 1100 miles of motorway range. In fact, technically as high as 1150, but that would be a completely empty tank, so more like 1100. To get a project of this magnitude, which no one's ever done before, so literally everything we were doing was the first time anyone's done it before, there was no roadmap to work with, and to still get all of that done in 330 days, that's quite remarkable. And then last but not least, of course, the question of what's next. Do I have more plans for the car? Do I have more plans for the future beyond this car, etc.? Well, my initial plan when I was first building it was, of course, that it would be inspired, pretty obviously, even the race number is a nod to it, by the Jules Corniche, which ran in the Dakar Rally. That vehicle famously looks like a Rolls, and it's considered to be one, but it actually isn't. It's a fiberglass replica of a Corniche with a Land Cruiser chassis and a big old V8 engine. So it's an awesome car, and I think it sold for like $800,000 recently. This, of course, was inspired by that, but I also didn't want it to look like I was just mimicking the car, and I think that's pretty obvious. You know, the way I've done the headlights, they're not tinted, it's got the crash tape instead. The race number is a nod to it, but it's not the same. The sponsors are all different. I went for a kind of monochromatic black and white look on the livery rather than the colour. So I like to think that you can see it's inspired by that, but certainly not mimicking the car, because that's not what I wanted to do. In terms of what's left to do on the car, well, there are always small things here and there. You can see here, for example, neither of the speedos work. It's got the Mitsubishi Speedo in the centre. Obviously, the Rolls one doesn't work anymore because it doesn't have the gearbox. In terms of fixing that, I think it probably just needs a new sensor, but I've got a GPS app on the phone anyway, which is working really well. So for now, I'm just using that one. In terms of the fuel gauge, that isn't working either. You know, when you're moving wires around on a build, it's bound to get damaged. So I think it's just a simple new sensor needed. But again, I devised a way of using a dipstick with a ruler with different litre measurements on there. So I know pretty damn accurately how much is actually left in the tank, at least if I'm parked on a flat surface. And in terms of what is left to do, well, there are three primary things that I want to get sorted, probably before heading out to the first major car shows like the Haynes Breakfast Club, for example. The first thing is I'm going to get the interior a little bit restored, and by restored I just mean basically cleaned. I reached out to the best leather treatment company there is, and they agreed to work with me on the car, so that video will be coming soon. I'm planning to do, as you can see on the side of the car, the sponsor, which is Genelite. Everyone always goes for stuff like Lanagard, but it's not the best, far from it. So I decided to look for which company actually was the best, and it's Genelite. So I reached out to them and said, I don't want you to pay me, but I will advertise you on the car if you want to send me some product, and if it is as good as it's supposed to be, I'll happily advertise it on the car. So that video will be coming out soon as well. Completely remove all the surface rust on the Mitsubishi chassis. None of it, thankfully, is structural. They have a rust-eating layer, which you paint underneath the car, takes it down to the bare metal, then you paint it with the rust protection, and then coat it with the grease, and that'll be job done. Plus the underside will have that nice silky black look to it. And then finally, I'm probably going to put it on some slightly chunkier tyres. I don't want to go overboard and ruin the road quality or the fuel economy, but probably similar tyres to what I've got on the Lincoln now, which is a set of General Grabbers, because I absolutely love those tyres. I've had them on a couple of different cars. I had some street grabbers on the Touareg, some all-terrain grabbers on the Lincoln, and I'll go for those same ones on this. They're not cheap, but they're very good, very hard wearing, and even with a really heavy car, they don't lose air. So again, I'll probably get some of those on it, well, probably before Haynes. I had initially planned to fit it with a custom roof rack with a spare wheel on top and a couple of jerry cans, kind of like, you know, a Dakar vehicle. In the end though, the only way to really do that is to weld it to the roof, and I don't really want to do that because that's a one-way thing. Once you've welded it to the roof, well, unless you want to cut it off again, so I'm just not going to bother. And I also don't want the car to get lost under modifications. You know, if you put like extended wheel arches and a snorkel and a roof rack and all this and a big antenna sticking out the top and spare wheels, you end up hiding the car under all the stuff. Like I said, I would potentially sell this car for the right price. Suffice it to say, I won't give you an exact price, but I would not lose money on it. And I already said what it cost to build, so if someone's crazy enough to pay that for it, otherwise I have no intention of selling it. I don't think anyone would buy it for that price, and I don't really care if they do or not. I love the car, it's fantastic to drive, and it's nice to have a car which I can genuinely use as an all-terrain, all-weather daily driver, but with all of the comforts of the Rolls. Super comfortable seats, armrests, still has the electric windows, the central lock-in, all of that good stuff. Even the central lock-in on the boot still works. So yeah, it's undeniably badass. If you're a Rolls fan, you might not like it. I already knew that certain people weren't going to like it, but anyone who sees this car up close and in person immediately recognises, yeah, this car was going to be nowhere but a scrapyard. You can see from the cracked paint and the filler that had been done in the past. I mean, as I've said before, this Rolls had a tow hitch on the back to begin with, so it already had a very, very strange life. Whether you like it or not, I saved the car from the scrapyard, and I'm happy with it, so who cares if anyone else is. That's it for this review though, certainly a bit of a different one, as I said, and of course, stick around for more beards and cars, sometimes the wacky, the weird and the wonderful like this one, and then some more Auto Trader kind of reviews in terms of vehicles which you should actually go out and buy, like your Jags and that kind of stuff. But I'll see you next time with those, and of course, thanks for watching.